She caught me staring again, but this time, she smiled and whispered, "Don't look away. I like when you stare." It was the kind of evening that makes you forget time exists, quiet, amber, a little unreal. I just finished unpacking the last of the boxes in my small apartment when I noticed the window opposite mine. Across the narrow courtyard, a soft yellow glow spilled out from a half-drawn curtain. Inside, a woman was moving with slow, unhurried grace, watering a row of plants lined neatly along her sill. Her movements were calm, practiced, as if every gesture carried its own rhythm. The light touched her hair, glinting in shades of chestnut and silver. I remember thinking how peaceful she looked, like someone who'd long ago made peace with the noise of the world. I didn't mean to stare. At first, it was just a passing glance, the kind you give when you notice life happening through another window. But something about her held me there. Maybe it was the way her sleeve slid down a little as she reached for the next pot, revealing the gentle strength in her forearm. Maybe it was the stillness, how she seemed perfectly content in her own company. Then, she looked up. Our eyes met through glass and air and distance, a few seconds stretched into something longer. I froze, half embarrassed, half entranced. Most people would have turned away, maybe pretended they hadn't noticed. But she didn't. She kept watering, one hand lifting the jug as if nothing had changed, but her lips curved, not into a smile exactly, more like an acknowledgement. I felt my face warm. I gave a polite, uncertain nod, the kind neighbors give when they cross paths at the mailbox. She tilted her head slightly, as though amused, and then went back to her plants. After that, I tried to focus on anything else, the quiet hum of my fridge, the smell of dust and cardboard still hanging in the air, but every sound felt thinner, somehow emptier. It's strange how quickly a stranger can occupy the edges of your thoughts. That night, when I turned off the lights and sat by my window, her lamp was still on. She was reading now, glasses low on her nose, one knee drawn close. For a moment, I thought she might look up again. I waited longer than I'd like to admit. And when she finally did, even from across the courtyard, it felt like the world had narrowed down to two windows and a silence that meant something neither of us could name yet. Mornings in the building had their own rhythm, the soft thud of doors closing, the hiss of coffee machines, the shuffle of people leaving for work. After a few days, I started to recognize her steps before I even saw her. Slow, confident, never hurried. The kind of walk that belonged to someone who didn't rush through life anymore. That morning, I was sorting through a small stack of mail, mostly bills and takeaway menus, when the elevator chimed and she appeared around the corner. The light from the window fell right across her face, catching a faint smile that felt familiar now, though I'd barely spoken to her. She wore a light coat, hair pulled loosely back, and carried a small tote bag with what looked like papers and a book peeking out. As she unlocked her mailbox, one of the envelopes slipped free and fluttered to the floor. Instinct made me bend down to grab it just as she did. Our hands met halfway. Her fingers brushed against mine, not a clumsy accident, but a soft, unintentional pause. Her skin was warm, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then she looked up, eyes steady, and the corner of her mouth lifted. "You're the new neighbor," she said. Her voice was low, calm, a little amused, like she already knew the answer. "Yeah," I managed, handing the envelope back. "Still figuring out which box is mine." She laughed quietly, the sound quick and genuine. "You'll get used to it." "We all do." Her perfume lingered, something faintly floral, like jasmine mixed with the scent of paper and rain. When she turned to leave, I caught myself watching her again, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle confidence in the gesture. After she disappeared down the hall, the building felt different, less like a place I just moved into, more like somewhere I wanted to stay. The rest of the morning blurred by. But later, as I passed her door on my way out, I heard faint music from inside, an old song, something from before my time. I slowed down without meaning to, just long enough to listen. It wasn't much, only a few words, a brief touch, a shared laugh. But something about it settled deep in me. We hadn't exchanged much more than a glance and a sentence, yet it already felt like we were speaking in a language no one else could hear. Nights in that courtyard always felt gentler than they should have. The city never truly slept, yet somehow, from my window, it seemed to pause. I'd finished a late dinner and left the dishes soaking, the hum of my small radio filling the silence. Outside, windows glowed like lanterns suspended in the dark, each one holding a fragment of someone's life. And then there was hers. Her curtains were half drawn, the warm lamplight spilling out just enough to outline her silhouette. She was sitting near the window, a book open on her lap, glasses slipping a little down the bridge of her nose. Every now and then she'd tilt her head to turn a page, the motion calm, unhurried. There was something magnetic about the simplicity of it, the comfort she seemed to have with her own solitude. I told myself I was only glancing, but the truth was quieter and more complicated. I watched because the sight of her made the world feel less sharp, less restless. When she lifted her eyes from the page, they found me through the dim space between us. For a second I froze, caught mid-breath. I thought she might look away this time, close the curtain, end whatever silent rhythm had started between us. But she didn't. Instead, she looked right at me, not accusing, not shy, just aware. The corner of her mouth curved into a smile that felt both playful and certain. Then, her voice reached me, soft, carried through the still air and the open window, "Don't look away. I like when you stare." The words hit somewhere deeper than they should have. My heart gave one hard thump, and I wasn't sure whether to laugh or apologize. Instead, I just stood there, half lit by my own lamp, the distance between us suddenly charged with something unspoken. She held my gaze a moment longer before returning to her book, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But I couldn't shake the sound of her voice, that low, steady warmth that made my apartment feel smaller, my pulse louder. For the rest of the night, the courtyard seemed alive with a quiet electricity. 2 windows facing each other, 2 lights burning later than usual. I sat there until her lamp finally flickered out, and the dark closed in, leaving me with the echo of her words, and a question I was almost afraid to answer. The next weekend drifted by quietly until a knock sounded on my door, soft, measured, almost hesitant. When I opened it, she was standing there, one hand braced lightly on the frame, dressed in jeans and a faded linen shirt. A streak of white paint ran across her wrist like an accidental signature. "Sorry to bother you," she said, smiling. "Do you have a minute? I could use an extra pair of hands." I followed her across the hall, the air carrying a faint scent of coffee and fresh paint. Her apartment felt instantly different from mine, lived in, layered with warmth. Art leaned against the walls waiting to be hung. A candle burned somewhere, blending cinnamon with the smell of drying paint. "I'm trying to lift this shelf, but it's heavier than I remembered," she said, gesturing toward a stack of books and a half-assembled piece of furniture. We worked side by side, quiet except for the scrape of wood and the soft shuffle of our feet on the rug. Occasionally our arms brushed, light, passing touches that shouldn't have meant anything, yet each one seemed to linger longer than the last. At one point, she steadied the shelf while I aligned the screws. "Hold it right there," I said, and she laughed softly. "You sound like you've done this before." "Mostly trial and error," I admitted. "I like that," she murmured, eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat too long. "People who try anyway." The moment passed, but something in her tone stayed with me, a quiet kind of approval that felt more intimate than any compliment. When we finished, she stepped back, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "Perfect," she said. "You're easy to be around." It was such a simple sentence, but the way she said it, almost under her breath, like she hadn't meant for it to escape, made my chest tighten. I helped her gather the last few tools. She thanked me again, standing close enough that the warmth of her shoulder brushed mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, that same teasing curve I'd first seen through the window. "Next time," she said, I'll at least make coffee as payment. When I stepped back into the hall, the air felt different, lighter, charged. I could still smell paint on my hands and cinnamon in my clothes, and beneath it all, something else, the quiet awareness that this was no longer just neighborly kindness. Something softer, deeper, had begun to take shape between us. A few nights later, rain began to fall again, a soft, steady drizzle that wrapped the building in hush. I'd been reading when a knock sounded at my door. She stood there, sweater sleeves pushed to her elbows, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I made too much," she said. "Thought you might help me fix that." We ended up in her living room, sitting across from each other on the couch. The lamp beside her glowed low and gold, painting the room in calm shadows. Outside, the rain brushed softly against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to slow the world. We talked easily at first, the kind of light conversation that fills quiet spaces, how long she'd lived here, the books stacked on her table, the way the neighborhood always smelled of wet stone after rain. But somewhere between sentences, the mood shifted. The air thickened, not tense exactly, just full. She was listening while I told her about moving, about feeling out of place in a city that never really stops. When I finished, she didn't answer right away. She turned her mug slowly in her hands, watching the steam curl upward. "It's strange," she said at last, her voice softer than the rain. "I didn't expect to like having someone this close again." The words seemed to hang there, fragile and unguarded. I felt them more than I understood them. She looked up, and our eyes met, steady, unblinking, almost searching. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the silence, but the quiet felt sacred. Instead, I just nodded. My throat tightened. Her fingers brushed a loose thread on the cushion beside me, absently tracing its edge. Then, almost without thought, she reached out and let her hand rest lightly on mine. Not firm, not fleeting, just there. The warmth of it was immediate. Small. Trembling, maybe, hers or mine, I couldn't tell. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The rain filled the space between heartbeats, and for that one long minute, the whole world seemed reduced to skin and breath and the faint clink of porcelain as her mug settled on the table. Then she withdrew her hand, slow and careful, as if afraid of breaking whatever delicate balance had formed. She smiled, a quiet, almost apologetic curve. "Thank you," she whispered. For what, I wasn't sure, the company, the listening, or simply not looking away. But when I left that night, her words followed me down the hall, warm and weightless, like the echo of something just beginning to matter. The storm came without warning. One moment, the night was calm, distant thunder murmuring somewhere beyond the city, and the next, rain was hammering the courtyard, wind pressing hard against the glass. The lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. For a few minutes, I just sat there, listening, the rush of rain, the low creak of the building, the sudden intimacy of the dark. Then, through the noise, I heard it, a faint knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, barefoot, holding a small flashlight that cast a trembling beam across her face. "I think the power's out on the whole block," she said, a little breathless, strands of hair clinging to her cheek. "Yeah," I said. "You okay?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "I was going to light some candles. Thought you might want company, or light." Her apartment felt different by candlelight, softer, somehow. The flicker of flame played across the walls, turning shadows into gold. She set a candle on the table, another on the windowsill. The room glowed like something half-remembered, familiar and far away. We sat close, talking quietly about nothing in particular, how storms always made her feel both small and safe, how I used to watch them from my old porch as a kid. Our voices barely rose above the rain. Then, as she reached to adjust a candle, her hand brushed my chest, light, steady, just enough to still me. Her fingers lingered there, resting over the fabric of my shirt. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor in her breath. "You can stop pretending you don't notice me," she said softly. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't teasing this time. It was simple truth, quiet, direct, and impossibly tender. I didn't answer right away. The air between us felt fragile, charged with something that didn't need words. I could see the candlelight reflected in her eyes, the way her lips parted slightly as if to say more, and then didn't. All I managed was a small nod. She smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders, and her hand slipped away, leaving a trace of warmth that seemed to hum beneath my skin. We sat like that for a long time, two people lit by candlelight, the storm outside softening to a steady patter. Nothing more happened, and yet everything had changed. When the lights finally flickered back to life, neither of us moved to turn them on. Morning came soft and silver, the kind that feels like the world has exhaled after holding its breath all night. The storm had passed, leaving the courtyard slick with rainwater, the air cool and sweet. The sound of dripping leaves echoed faintly through the open windows. I brewed coffee, still half lost in the quiet of last night, in the flicker of candlelight, the softness of her voice, the feel of her hand against my chest. Everything seemed clearer now, though I couldn't name exactly what had changed. Only that it had. When I stepped into the hall, she was already there. She wore a long cardigan, her hair pulled loosely back, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. The air between us held that familiar pull, gentle, inevitable. "Morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Hey," I replied. "No more storms." "Not outside," she teased, then laughed softly, shaking her head as if to take the edge off her own words. We stood there for a moment, two neighbors in the hallway, pretending that was all we were. She reached up and brushed a bit of lint from my shoulder, her fingers lingering just a little too long. Her touch was light but sure, like she'd done it before in her mind. "You're not staring today," she said. The same teasing tone as before, but softer now, almost fond. I smiled. Maybe I'm just waiting for permission. Her eyes met mine, steady, warm, unguarded. For a heartbeat, the world around us faded. She stepped closer, the faint scent of her perfume threading through the morning air. Then, with a small, knowing smile, she whispered, "You never needed it." It wasn't a declaration, it was an understanding, quiet and complete. We didn't move closer, didn't reach for anything more. We just stood there, close enough to feel the warmth between us, close enough to know that whatever this was, fragile, unspoken, real, would stay. She touched my hand briefly before turning toward her door. "Coffee later?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." As she disappeared inside, the hall felt brighter, the air lighter. Through the window at the end of the corridor, the sky had cleared to a soft blue. And for the first time since I'd moved in, it felt like home. If you felt something in this story, that quiet pull between two people finding connection in the smallest moments, don't forget to leave a like. It helps more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, slow, tender, honest, hit subscribe, and stay a while. There's always another story waiting across the courtyard.